Hi everyone, in hard surface exercise number 2 we're going to model this nice and detailed brick fence, and it's actually a pretty simple object. There's no real challenges, but I thought it might be fun to do something like this. It's a good example of how you can do beautiful things with very simple means and without being an expert at modeling. The inspiration for this brick fence was an image I found on Shutterstock. And I can't distribute the image, but I've provided a download link where you can get the image. So make sure to follow the link in the video description and download the image. We're going to need this as a reference. So let's get started. First of all, I'm going to switch to the front view, hit Shift V to go to the viewport settings, and on the back tab we can load our reference image. I'm going to change the size to 1500. That's the original image resolution, and let's move this over on the x-axis, and I'm going to move it down to the floor like this, and let's add a little bit of transparency. Because we've only got this front view of the fence, we're going to start with the posts. And the reason for that is because it's a bit difficult to tell how deep the brick wall needs to be. So we're going to start with the posts. And as far as the posts are concerned, it's pretty safe to say that these are square. And once we've got the posts, we can then determine more easily how deep this brick wall needs to be. So let's go ahead and add a cube. I'm going to center it on the right post here, and then I'm going to scale it. You can see in the reference image that we have these two lines here, and what these mean is that we have a cutout on the corners. So what I'm going to do to create this is I'm going to scale the cube to about here. Let's move this over a little bit, maybe scale this up a little bit. I think I'm going to make this 80 by 80. If you left click on the size over here, you can select all three of these options, and if I change the size to 80 and then hold down Control and hit enter, it's going to change the cube to 80 centimeters in all dimensions. So now we can move this down a little bit. To about here. Let's make it editable and go to polygon mode. And I'm going to ring select these polygons here, hit D for extrude, and I'm going to switch off preserve groups. And now we can extrude these polygons, and let's do maybe 8 centimeters, and you can see we have this cutout here on the corners. Now let's go ahead and select the bottom polygons. I'm going to hit D for extrude again. Make sure you switch on preserve groups again, and I'm going to extrude these polygons down a little bit, scale them, maybe move these down a little bit further, and quick extrude them down a little bit, and maybe I'll move these points up, go back to polygon mode, extrude down again, scale, and extrude these polygons down. If you want these surfaces to be more parallel, we could use snapping and create a guide that we could snap to these 2 points here, and then we can snap the guide to this point here, select our object, select these points, and then scale them. Switch off the y-axis before you do that, and we could scale them like this. And we could also select these points here, copy the size on the y-axis, and then select these points here, switch to the scale tool, go to the modeling axis tab, move the axis all the way to the top, and then just paste the size, hit apply. And now these two areas here are the same height. I'm going to switch off snapping and delete the guide. And let's go back to polygon mode. As for these rounded areas here, it looks like there is a bit of a ledge here, but I thought this part looks a little bit better if we start the curve right away without adding an extra ledge here. If you want to, you can do this differently, but I'm just going to extrude these polygons down to about here. And in edge mode, I'm going to ring select these edges and then use connect points edges to create an edge loop right at the center. I'm going to select these edges and then just scale them out. Maybe like so. And let's use the bevel tool. I'm going to add a couple of subdivisions, and I'm going to limit the bevel so we can stop at this edge here and this edge here. So let's left click and drag all the way, and then I'm going to deselect everything and optimize the object. Let's go back to polygon mode, and now we can select these bottom polygons, extrude them down a bit, hit D for extrude. I'm going to extrude with an offset of 0, and then scale these polygons. And I'm going to quick extrude them down a bit, quick extrude down again, scale, and quick extrude one more time. In order to move these polygons to the floor, I'm going to go back to model mode. I'm going to switch on enable axis, and let's move the axis to the bottom, switch off the axis again, go to point mode, select these points down here, and let's move them to the floor. Going to create a material, just a default white material, and let's add a floor. I'm going to make this invisible for the editor, and in the render settings I'm going to add some ambient occlusion. And what I also like to do sometimes is add the cell renderer to render the edges, and we need to switch on color and edges. And now if we do a render, it looks like this. So let's continue and create the rest of this post. I'm going to select these points here, and let's move them up all the way to here. And let's go back to polygon mode. I'm going to select these polys up here, hit D for extrude, and I'm going to do an offset of 0, and I'm going to scale these polygons out to about here, and then I'm going to quick extrude them up, hit D for extrude, scale them, quick extrude them up, D for extrude, and I'm going to scale these down, and I'm going to quick extrude them up. And let's ring select these polygons and scale them. Make sure to switch off the y-axis here. Let's scale these out a bit. Switch on the y-axis again. Select these polygons. Extrude with an offset of 0. Scale them out. Quick extrude them up. And let's do quick extrude one more time. And I'm going to scale these polygons to about here. extrude with an offset of 0, scale them out a little bit, quick extrude them up, and scale. And in edge mode, I'm going to ring select these edges here and use connect points edges. And now we can select these edges here and scale them down a bit. And we can select these edges and scale them out a bit, maybe move them down like so. And now we can use the bevel tool, and I'm going to bring the subdivisions down to maybe 3. So let's bevel these edges here and these ones. Then deselect everything and optimize the object. And that's looking pretty nice, I think. So select the top polygons, extrude with an offset of 0, scale them up, and quick extrude them up. Now you can see that this cutout continues to this area here, but I want to get rid of this cutout at this point. I think this will look a little bit better. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to ring select these edges here and connect them, and I'm also going to connect these edges here. And now we can go to the top view, switch to point mode, and delete all of these points here. And I'm going to delete these 2 polygons here. Then go back to the top view, switch to edge mode. Let's select this edge here. I'm going to quick extrude it out like this. I'm going to quick extrude this edge, then switch on snapping, move this back, snap it to this edge here, select this edge, snap it to the other one, deselect everything, optimize, and then let's use close polygon hole to close the holes at the top and at the bottom. And I'm going to select this edge here. Let's switch off snapping. I'm going to bevel it with 5 subdivisions, deselect everything, optimize, and let's get rid of the n-gons by selecting these points and connecting them. So we have quads down here, and up here I'm going to connect these points. So let's use symmetry twice, and the second one needs to be XY. Let's make this editable. And I'm going to select these edges and dissolve them, and I'm going to dissolve these ones as well. So now we can select the top polygon here, and let's quick extrude it up. I'm going to ring select these polygons and scale them, switching off the y-axis. Let's scale them out to about here. Maybe I'll scale these down a little bit again. Let's quick extrude this polygon up. I'm going to scale it down, and it's important that the y-axis is switched on when you do that. If I go to my perspective view and switch off the y-axis, if I scale this, you can see we're not scaling this uniformly. But if I switch on the y-axis, I can scale, well, at least I should be able to scale these on all 4 sides. Or let's move the axis back to 0. Maybe that is the problem, and you can see now everything's working as it should. So let's scale this down. I'm going to extrude with an offset of 0, scale that polygon down, quick extrude it up, ring select these polygons, scale them, select the top polygon, quick extrude it up, scale it with the y-axis switched on. Let's maybe move that reference image over a little bit so that looks about right. I'm going to extrude with an offset of 0, scale, quick extrude again, scale, quick extrude, scale, and quick extrude one more time. And maybe let's ring select these polygons and scale them a little bit, like so. Next we're going to add this curve here. So I'm going to ring select these edges and connect them, and then I'm going to scale them. And you can get pretty close to that curve without trial and error if you try to follow the beginning of these curves up here and down here with those edges. So I'm going to scale these down a little bit further, maybe move them down a little bit. So you can see I'm following the beginning of these curves, and now if I bevel these edges, I won't have to guess what the result will be. Let's deselect everything and optimize. And we have one problem here with the Phong shading. We could try to reduce the Phong angle to get rid of this shading. And the problem is we also have these curved areas down here. If I select the Phong tag and reduce the Phong angle to 0, you can see that these curves are getting really faceted. We are getting rid of the problem up here, but we've just created a new problem here. So I'm not going to change the Phong angle. Let's move this back to maybe 33. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to ring select these edges, and I'm going to loop select these edges and these edges, and I'm going to break the Phong shading. So we're getting rid of that shading and we're keeping the curves nice and smooth. Next I'm going to add the extrusions here, and I'm only going to do these on 3 sides. There's no point in adding that detail where the wall is. So in polygon mode I'm going to use my rectangle selection tool, switch on tolerance selection on the options tab, and now I can just left click and drag over this front polygon, which will also select the polygon at the back. Let's go to the perspective view, and I'm going to select this polygon here as well. And let's move that reference image back over a little bit. And now we can use the shortcut I to get the extrude inner tool, and let's extrude these polygons to about here. I'm going to scale them on the y-axis a little bit, and let's extrude inner again to about here, and maybe scale these down just a little bit, like so. I'm going to hit UY to grow the selection, and I'm going to extrude these polygons down. Let's do maybe 4 centimeters here, Let's select these 3 polygons and extrude these down 4 centimeters as well. Next we're going to add the grooves, and for this I'm going to use the plane cut tool. And we have to be in free mode here. Let's switch to edge mode. And with the plane cut tool selected, I can now hold down Shift, left click and drag, and this will create a horizontal cut. And while the tool is still active, I can change the number of cuts, and I can also change the spacing. So let's do maybe 78, and let's add 2 more edges. I'm going to select the cuts. If I go back to my move tool, I should still have these edges selected, and I can now bevel them. And this time I'm not going to use any subdivisions, so let's reduce this to 0. And I'm going to do a fairly small offset. Let's do maybe 1. That should be enough. And with these edges selected, hold down Control and left click on polygons, and this will convert the edge selection to a polygon selection, and we can use extrude to extrude these polygons down a little bit. Let's maybe do 1 centimeter. And the last detail we need is this sphere up here. So let's go ahead and add a sphere. Now, in order to move it into this position here, what I'm going to do is I'll make it a child of the cube, and then I can use character commands, reset position scale rotation. And I use this a lot, so I have a custom shortcut for that. And if I reset PSR, what happens is that the sphere will be moved to the center of the object axis of the parent object. So we don't have to worry about moving it around manually and trying to position it. And all we have to do now is move it up into position here and scale it down. And I want to use as few triangles as possible, so I'm going to switch the sphere from standard to a hexahedron. I'm going to reduce the segments a little bit. It's still going to render perfect as long as we don't make this editable. And let's go ahead and move this up and put it on top of our post. I'm going to rename this to post. Now let's add a symmetry object right at the center of the grid. And I'm going to make the post a child of the symmetry, and it's going to mirror our post over to the other side. Let's rename this one to posts. Now we can continue and create the brick wall in between those posts. Before we start, let's have another look at the reference image. Whenever I do brick walls like this one using actual geometry, I use different objects for the bricks and the walls behind those bricks. And there's a number of reasons for that. For example, if you do this as a single piece of geometry, you would create a lot more polygons. It would also make texturing more difficult because usually you want different textures for the grooves and for the bricks. As far as the top wall is concerned, we're going to do 2 different versions of the wall behind those bricks. One will be fairly high poly and one will be very low poly. And the reason I'm doing that is because maybe I want to use this fence in a scene where I don't want a lot of actual geometry. So let's say I want to get rid of this top border here, which will be fairly detailed, and I want to get rid of those bricks. And that means that we need a wall that has enough polygons to make this curve here look nice and smooth, and then we could add textures or shaders to create those bricks. So we're going to do one version of this wall that is fairly high poly and that we could use in a scene where we don't want actual geometry for the bricks and for the top border. The second version of the wall we're going to do will be very low poly, because that wall will be hidden behind those bricks and it also will be hidden behind that top border. So we can do this with a minimum amount of polygons. Let's go ahead and start with the bottom wall. We're going to need a cube for this, and I'm going to make that cube editable, and I'm going to use axis center to put the axis at the bottom of the cube, and we're going to move it to the floor, and let's scale it to about here. The important thing is that it penetrates the posts, and let's scale it down on the y-axis to about here. And we also need to change the depth. Let's do 43 centimeters for the depth, and we're going to add a brick layer on top of that, and the depth of that brick layer will be maybe 2 centimeters. I'm going to rename this to, let's do wall bottom. And I'm going to select the polygon here at the front, and I'm going to split it off as a new object, and that will be the bricks bottom. And let's go to solo mode. And what I'll do is I'll use the plane cut tool with only one cut, and I'm going to hold down shift, left click and drag to create an edge down here, and I'm going to move this edge down a little bit to maybe about here. And because these two rows of bricks each have the same height, I'm going to ring select these edges and connect them. And now we can select these two edges here and bevel them. I'm going to use an offset of 1 centimeter here, and let's convert this to a polygon selection and delete the polygons. And now we can ring select the edges here at the top and use the plane cut tool, hold down shift, left click and drag to create a vertical cut, and we want to restrict this cut to the selected edges. Looks like something went wrong. No, it didn't. So we still have this edge here. Let's increase the number of cuts and let's change the spacing. So we need 11 cuts here. And now I'm going to ring select these two edges here, and again use the plane cut tool to create the edges for the bricks down here. And I think we don't really need this one. It's going to be hidden behind the post, so I'm just going to dissolve it. And now we can ring select these edges, deselect the ones on the left and on the right, bevel these edges, convert them to a polygon selection, and delete the polygons. And we have our brick wall. In polygon mode, I'm going to select all the polygons and extrude them 2 centimeters. Let's switch solo mode off. And maybe let's put that white material on these two objects. Now we also need those bricks on the other side of the fence. And in this case, it doesn't really make much sense to use symmetry, which is what I did in the time-lapse video. Because we have this border here, which is 4 polygons, we will have the same 4 polygons on the other side, which would increase the polygon count quite a bit. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to select the points at the back, and I'm going to move them to 0 on the z-axis. And now we can use a symmetry object to mirror these over on the xy plane. And let's make the symmetry object editable. And we can just dissolve these edges. In order to provide a groove between the bottom bricks and the bottom border here, I'm going to select the bottom wall, select the top polygon, and I'm going to move it up 2 centimeters on the y-axis. And now we can copy this object, rename it to border bottom, and let's go to model mode, switch on snapping, and I'm going to move this object up and snap it to this edge here. Going to switch off snapping and scale this down on the y-axis to about here. And we can delete the polygons on the left and on the right. Let's go to edge mode. I'm going to switch on tolerance selection again, and I'm going to select these edges here and these ones over here, and then I'm going to use edge cut, 2 subdivisions, and let's scale these edges up a little bit. And maybe I'll make that reference image a little more transparent. So we've got something like this, and I'm going to select the edges, and I've still got tolerance selection switched on, which means I'm selecting the edges at the front and at the back. Let's bevel those, convert the edge selection to a polygon selection, and before I extrude these, I'm going to switch to polygon mode, and I'm going to increase the depth of this a little bit. Let's maybe do 54 centimeters. Now let's go back to polygon mode, and I'm going to extrude these polygons back a little bit. Let's do maybe 2 centimeters. And let's see how that looks. And in polygon mode, I'm going to select the polygons over here and over here, and I'm going to delete them. For the top wall, we can again reuse the wall bottom, so let's make a copy and call this wall top. Go to model mode, switch on snapping, and I'm going to snap it to the top of the bottom border here. Let's switch off snapping, and I'm going to scale this in the z-axis. Let's maybe do I don't know, let's do 33 centimeters here. And I'm going to scale this up to here. And before I add that cutout, I'm going to create the bricks. In polygon mode, I'm going to split off the front polygon, and let's switch this to solo mode. I'm going to center the axis on this polygon, and now we can scale it down and make it the size of one of these bricks. So maybe let's do 54 by 13. And I'm going to put this in a cloner. Let's change the mode to honeycomb array and the offset direction to width. And let's see, we need 54 for the width and 13 for the height, and this will give us our brick wall. And of course we need those grooves in between those bricks, so I'm going to increase each of these values by 2. And we also need a lot more bricks, so let's increase the count. Let's move this over a bit, line it up with the bricks in the reference image. And then I'm going to use a connect object. And before I make this editable, I'm going to delete the tags, because if I make this editable right away, we're getting tons and tons of these tags. So let's go back a step, and I'm just going to delete these 2 tags before I make this editable, and now we have an object without all of those tags. I'm going to switch off solo mode, and of course we don't need all of these bricks here, so what I'll do is I'll make a cut. Let's hide everything but the top wall and the bricks top. And now let's go to point mode. I'm going to use the plane cut tool, and let's switch this to world, and we need to change the plane to YZ. I'm only going to make one cut, and I'm going to snap the plane cut tool to the edge of the top wall. So let's switch on snapping and switch off restrict to selection, and let's make a cut here and here. So that means we can get rid of all of these bricks here and over here. We don't need these bricks up here. Let's hit UY to grow the selection, and we can get rid of the row of bricks below that one as well. So I'm going to delete all of these, and down here I'm going to delete, let's do all of these ones, UY to make sure we select all the points of the top row here, and let's delete those points. And I'm going to move the axis of this object to the bottom, snap it to the bottom edge of the top wall, and then I'm just going to move it up by 2 centimeters to create a groove between these bricks and the bottom border here. Let's switch the other objects back on and see what we've got. And it looks as if we could get rid of more geometry on the brick object here, because these tiny pieces of the bricks here are hidden behind the post. So what I'll do is I'll switch everything back off except for the top wall and the bricks, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these points over here. I'm going to scale them to 0, and then I'm going to snap them to the edge of the wall. And let's do the same thing over here. And then deselect everything and optimize those bricks. Next we're going to create a cutout up here, and we're going to start with the top wall. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ring select these edges here and use edge cut with 2 subdivisions. I'm going to scale these edges out a little bit like so, and I think we'll also need edges here at the center. I'm also going to ring select these edges and connect them, and let's move these edges down a bit like so maybe. Next I'm going to create a cylinder. I'm going to put it to -Z, and I'm going to snap it to these edges up here. Let's increase the radius. Let's make it a little smaller and move our cylinder down a little bit. And it looks like this should work. In order to make this cutout nice and smooth, I'm going to increase the rotation segments, and I'm going to use 72, so that's twice the default number of rotation segments here. And I'm going to move the top edges of the wall down a bit. To about here. So I'm lining these edges up with this edge here on the cylinder. And by doing this, we're also moving the top edges below that border a little bit, which is a good thing because we don't want any poke throughs. So now we can use a bool object and I want to create a single object here. Let's go ahead and make this editable, but I'm going to keep a backup copy just in case. In any case, we're going to need that cylinder again. So now let's make this editable, and let's delete all of the tags that we don't need. Let's do the same thing for these objects. And I'm going to select the polygons here at the front, hit UI to invert the selection, delete everything else, and then optimize this object. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the line cut tool and make a cut straight up here. because I don't want this to curve back in. And now we can just delete this point. And we can also use this object as a basis for our low poly wall. So this is going to be the wall top, high poly, and this is going to be the low poly version. Let's hide this for now. And let's use the symmetry object on this. Let's make the symmetry object editable. Select all the polygons, hit D for extrude. We want to create caps, and I'm going to extrude this back to the original thickness or depth, which was 33 centimeters. And let's select all the polygons and reverse the normals. So that's our high poly version. I'm going to hide it and move it up there. And let's create the low poly version. I'm going to select all of these edges here, and we should be able to dissolve them. And I think that's all the geometry we really need. All we need to do is make sure that these edges here are inside of this top border, because we don't want any gaps in between these two objects. So I'm just going to move this point over a little bit. Maybe let's move this one over as well. And let's move this one up a little bit. And I'm going to connect these 2 points. And that gives us 2 four-sided polygons, and that's all the geometry that we need to create that low poly wall. So let's use the symmetry object, make it editable. And extrude these polygons back, reverse the normals. And for this low poly version, we don't even need the polygons here, so I'm going to ring select them and delete them. So that leaves a total of 8 polygons for our low poly wall here. Let's hide this object and make the bricks visible. We have to create the cutout for the bricks as well, and we're going to reuse the cylinder that we created earlier. And let's add a bool object. And in this case, I don't really want to create new edges, so I'm going to hide those. I'm going to create a single object, and let's make this editable. Now actually, I want to do this a little bit differently, because right now we'll probably be creating a gap between these bricks and the top border. So maybe it would be a better idea to just reduce the radius of our cylinder a little bit. And we don't need to follow the curve of this cutout. We just need to make sure that these bricks are hidden behind that top border. So I'm going to make this editable. Delete everything that I don't need. And let's clean this up. I'm going to turn all of these into four-sided polygons. We can delete these small pieces. And over here, I'm just going to move this point up, line it up with this point here using axis extension, and we can delete this point. Let's delete these two. And again, use X's extension to line this one up with this point over here. Same here. Let's switch to polygon mode. You can see we have 3 n-gons. I'm going to use a plugin called Special Selections, which is a free plugin, and this lets me select all triangles, quadrangles and n-gons, for example. So I'm going to select all the n-gons and I can see where these n-gons are. So let's go ahead and fix those. You can see we have 2 points here. I'm just going to use the weld tool to weld those together. Let's go back to polygon mode. The next n-gon is over here. And again, we have 2 points here. So I'm just going to weld these back to polygon mode. And I'm going to weld these 2 points. So now we should have all quads. Next I'm going to extrude the polygons 2 centimeters forward without creating caps. And let's change the Phong angle to 33 to get rid of that shading. And the Phong angle of 180 degrees was created by the connect object we used to convert the cloner object when we created those bricks. For some reason, when you make that editable, Cinema 4D changes the Phong angle to the maximum of 180 degrees. Let's go to point mode, and I'm going to select all of the points at the back. Which is a bit tricky. And I'm going to move these to 0 on the z-axis, but it looks as if we need to change the object axis first. So let's enable the axis and move this to 0 on the z-axis. Then let's go back to point mode, and now we can move these to the center. Then use a symmetry object, make the symmetry editable. Convert the point selection to an edge selection and dissolve these edges. So let's switch everything else back on and see what we've got so far. It seems like I need to reapply the material to both of these objects. So that's looking pretty good, I think. And the last thing we need is this border here at the top. For the top border, we can reuse the cylinder that we created earlier. So I'm going to make a copy of that. And let's clean up our object manager a little bit. Maybe I'll put these two in a null object, which is our backup folder. And let's rename this to bricks top. And what I'll do with this cylinder is I'll make it editable, and then I'm going to select all the polygons here at the front, hit UI to invert the selection, delete everything else, and optimize the object. So we have this flat disk left, and I'm going to select all the polygons and use extrude inner like this. We can delete these polygons, optimize again, and we can also get rid of this part of the object. And over here I'm going to use the line cut tool, make a straight cut like this, and then we can also get rid of all of these points here. And next I'm going to select these edges here, and I'm going to use the slide tool. Hold down Control, left click and drag to create these new edges here. I'm going to use an offset of 8 centimeters, and let's do that again. And I'm going to select these edges here and again clone them with an offset of 8 centimeters. Up here I'm going to make a straight cut from this point over to here, so that follows this line in the reference image, and we can get rid of these edges. And over here I'm going to make a straight cut up like this. Let's delete these points, and maybe let's move these ones over just a little bit to get a smoother transition. Let's see how that looks. I think that's fine. And now we can select these edges over here. Let's extrude them and scale them down. I'm going to make another cut here and dissolve these edges. And you can see we're missing one edge. We need one for this line here. So I'm going to make a cut straight over like this, which gives us this n-gon here, and I'm going to get rid of that by making a cut like so, and then we can select these edges up here and dissolve them. So now we can select all of these polygons here. And let's go to solo mode. I'm going to extrude these back a bit. Let's do maybe not that much. Going to do 2.5. And let's delete the polygons over here and over here. And I want to delete these ones as well and optimize the object. Now we can select these polygons here, extrude them back, delete these ones, and these ones, optimize the object. And now we're going to select these polygons down here and extrude one more time. Delete the polygons we don't need. Optimize. And let's move these edges over, make sure they penetrate the post. Let's have a look. Okay, so I think that's looking good. Maybe we could move this point over a little bit further. And actually, let's just go ahead and select all of these points, switch on snapping and use axis extension to line these points up with this one. Okay, and I think that's looking fine. Let's select the edges on the borders. And I'm going to extrude these back a bit. Scale them to 0 on the Z-axis. And let's switch off solo mode. I'm going to move the axis to the bottom. And let's go ahead and move this back. And I'm going to move the object axis to 0 on the Z and on the X-axis. Let's go to point mode. I'm going to select all the points at the back and move those to 0 on the Z-axis. First of all though, we need to switch off enable axis. And now we can use a symmetry object. And let's use another symmetry object, change the mirror plane to X, Y. I'm going to make this editable. Let's rename this to border top. And I'm going to dissolve the edges up here and also the ones down here. And I'm going to create a null object, rename it to brick fence. Let's put a white material on there, delete this tag, delete all of these material tags, and I'm just going to put all of my objects into this null object. So we've created a pretty neat looking brick fence here. I hope you've liked this tutorial. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you again soon.